Super Talk 99.7 WTN. We keep talking about EVs. I'm going to talk about this very briefly. Pete Buttigieg is Transportation Secretary. Pete Buttigieg is in the news today for, at least I would say, all the wrong reasons. Tesla sales dropping as its grip on the EV market continues to slip. All day long, yesterday, I was reading about EVs and these electric vehicles and how they are now even more. The sales are slipping. And the reason, of course, or the reasons are obvious why these electric vehicles are dropping in sales. It's because they're too expensive. Nobody trusts them and nobody wants them. And that's the bottom line. And so one of the things that Buttigieg now and Joe Biden and the rest of the Biden clan are trying to do is try to, it seems to me, shame the American people for not wanting electric vehicles. Tesla sales have dropped almost 9% as EV demand slows. That's from the Wall Street Journal. This is being described as an unmitigated disaster as the Biden administration continues to try to mandate electric vehicles, and America is just pushing back. Yahoo Finance, this is a headline. U.S. auto sales grow, but EV growth is now slowing further. And so Pete Buttigieg, everybody's looking at Joe Biden, who continues to double down on this, by the way. He continues to double down on the EV mandates. And so he goes on to, Pete Buttigieg goes on to Fox News, and it was quite the conversation. This is how the question was posed to the transportation secretary.
Tesla sales fell 8.5% the first quarter of this year. Ford this week is laying off 2/3 of its workforce at the F-150 electric Lightning plant. It's also scaling back a battery production facility because of sagging sales. EV sales are nowhere near what this president wanted or expected, yet the administration continues to shove them down consumers' throats. Why?
I mean, what a great point and what a great question. And here's the deal. You won't see that kind of a question on MSNBC or CNN. Now, remember when Donald Trump was out there and he was saying it makes zero sense for the union leadership to back Joe Biden because his EV mandates will effectively kill jobs, and that China would be able to capitalize on that mandate far more than America would as Joe Biden continues to push those mandates. And so the bottom line is the American people do not want these electric vehicles. But if they do, they can buy them. You can buy an electric vehicle right now. If you have the money and it makes sense to you, then you can buy them. Let the free market decide, and government mandates, by and large, they never end well.
Well, let's be clear. Consumers have wanted and purchased more EVs every single year than the year before. And, Tesla is facing more competition as GM and Ford and Stellantis and other competitive players start to make sure they get a piece of the EV market. Let's be clear that the automotive sector is moving toward EVs, and we can't pretend otherwise. Sometimes when these debates happen, I feel like it's the early 2000s, and I'm talking to some people who think that we can just have landline phones forever.
Really? I mean, that one particular comment is what I would say, just one example of Democrats and some of these folks that are pushing electric vehicles. They're shaming people who want their gas-powered vehicle.
I feel like it's the early 2000s, and I'm talking to some people who think that we can just have landline phones forever.
Now, he's missing the point, because when he says that the auto industry has been moving towards EVs, that's fine. If it's market-driven, if it's free market-driven. And the other thing that I would say is perhaps the reason the auto industry has been moving towards EVs is because of the mandates. It is, yes, also an emerging technology, but one that we don't have the lead on. And despite the mandates, we still don't. The American people, they don't trust EVs. They can't afford them either. There's just a lot of issues with electric vehicles. But to intimate that we're just a bunch of, knuckle-dragging Neanderthals who want to cling to our landline phones, I would say is just silly. But here's the thing. If you'd like to go down that road, we can. There were no mandates for smartphones, right? there were no mandates for smartphones. The technology emerged and it got better and better. And we got to the point where we as Americans had to have them with the free market economy. That's how these smartphones ultimately became so popular across the world, is through the free market, not by government mandates. No government mandates like Biden is trying to do right now.
The reality is that the automotive sector is moving toward EVs, and the U.S. can either fall behind China or we can claim the lead. President Biden wants to make sure that those EVs are made in America, especially, again, as more Americans choose EVs every single year than the year before. We've got to make sure that those are made on American soil in places like northern Indiana, where I grew up, places like Michigan, where I live right now. During the Trump administration, China was really able to build an advantage in the EV market, and obviously not because they're big environmentalists over in China, just because that's the economically smart play. We've been working to make sure that that advantage comes back onto American soil.
All right, so that is Pete Buttigieg, and that was part of a longer interview on electric vehicles and the mandates and how the Biden administration is continuing and doubling down and tripling down on the EV mandates, even though the American people clearly don't want this. Now, you folks remember when Donald Trump said this, right?
Let me tell you something to China. If you're listening, President Xi, and you and I are friends, but he understands the way I deal, those big monster car manufacturing plants that you're building in Mexico right now, and you think you're going to get that, you're going to not hire Americans, and you're going to sell the cars to us. No, we're going to put a 100% tariff on every single car that comes across the line.
There you go.
And you're not going to be able to sell those cars. If I get elected, now if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole... That's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it.
Oh, we remember the whole bloodbath non-controversy. You know, some people would say it was a controversy. I would say it was a non-controversy, or it was clearly all made up, taken completely out of context. But here's the thing. President Trump was right when he was talking about a bloodbath as it related to what I just mentioned a few moments ago. A bloodbath in the auto industry related to jobs. And that's part of what the questioning was from Fox News to Pete Buttigieg. And he said a couple of different times, let me be clear. More Americans are buying electric vehicles 1 year after the next. The number of people buying these electric vehicles keeps going up. Well, that's all fine, well, and good, but that doesn't negate the fact that Americans and the auto industry is being decimated by the forcing of the Biden administration to make these electric vehicles, which right now the American people don't really seem to have much of an appetite for. China is building these EV plants in Mexico. And that's what Donald Trump was talking about. China building plants in Mexico, then sending those vehicles across the border into our country. So when Joe Biden mandates electric vehicles, and American car companies cannot sell them because they're so expensive to manufacture here in America, China's making them at, really cheaply in Mexico. And they don't have, let's face it, there's not a lot of regulations, and there's a lot of cheap labor as well in Mexico. So those come across our border, and our own auto manufacturers, they have to deal with the unions and all kinds of higher costs to make these things. And so, yeah, they're going to get obliterated by these Chinese-made vehicles that are being manufactured in Mexico and then coming across our border. So realize what's going on. Cars made in China and imported into America, again, made in China, have a 27.5% tariff. If they're built in Mexico with Chinese parts, basically assembling Chinese vehicles in Mexico, they only are subjected to a 2.5% tariff. So that's what China's doing. And that's why when Donald Trump said that China is building these cars in Mexico and they're coming across our border, that's why Trump, when he said, I'm going to impose a 100% tariff on those vehicles from China coming through Mexico, people applauded because the people of Michigan know what that means. It means that Trump is trying to level the playing field. That's what Donald Trump is trying to do. He wants to make a 100% tariff. At least that's what he says. We'll have to see what happens. But there's a lot of concerns with these electric vehicles. Again, they're still incredibly expensive. We also, by the way, and this was discussed in the interview on Fox News with Pete Buttigieg, we don't have the electrical infrastructure to deal with all of these electric vehicles. The batteries for EVs also have a significant impact, and the mining for those minerals also have a tremendous impact. So the more that the Biden administration continues this push towards EVs, number one, the more stressed our electrical infrastructure is going to be. And guess what? Ultimately, it is going to become worse and worse for our environment. It doesn't make any sense. It is 6:19 on Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. But, you know, if you are hearing this one audio bite.
I feel like it's the early 2000s, and I'm talking to some people who think that we can just have landline phones forever.
I think that Buttigieg ultimately is defeating his own argument because smartphones came not with a government mandate, but with the demand from the world. And the free market was at work. The free market was at play. So really what he's doing is he is defeating his own argument. Pete Buttigieg, Transportation Secretary. 615-737-9986. The Members Nutrition Super Text line is open. Now, here's the thing. Because every time I talk about electric vehicles, people will text in and they'll say, but I love my electric vehicle. Well, good on you. I love that you love your electric vehicle, but it's not the government's place to decide that we, the American people, should be mandated to buy those electric vehicles.